5 hours and 52 minutes left over. Okay. All right. On a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because according to the, I didn't look at this when I asked the question, but now I'm just looking at under committee of the whole under the order paper. It says so far it's been 13 hours and 39 minutes, which is probably closer to what I was thinking. So I don't know. Maybe we can work this out as we go ahead. We still have plenty of time to work out the exact number, but that's
Okay.
fine. Thank you.
We can double check and report back. Okay. Thank you. The Committee on the Whole House on Bill is now called to order. The honourable member for Shelburne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to take the opportunity to discuss Bill 117, particularly draw your attention to Clause 7, dealing with assets of trust agreements. Mr. Chair, it's interesting to witness the events of this particular week, and there's a number of news highlights of different events, but I take this of the events in this House in the last 48 hours as an opportunity. And here, Mr. Chair, is an opportunity for the other two parties to clean the slate, an opportunity to deal with trust agreements. I like to quote or use a partial of a famous speech, and this was earlier mentioned today, of Mr. Martin Luther King's birthday, which will be January the 15th, I believe, in the last closing sentence of his famous speech. Free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last. And here is an opportunity to free yourself of this particular trust agreements or trust funds and clear yourself for the future of politics of Nova Scotia. What an opportunity. And I witnessed in the last 24 hours an opportunity for the other two parties, Mr. Chair, to make amendments, to agree to the amendments. And yet, we have watched them in silence. In silence. I have been amazed by that. And I was suggested that when you go to represent your community, you will be challenged. You will be challenged on a number of fronts, and you need to have the opportunity to debate in a public forum and to stand for what you believe in. And here is an opportunity to stand and state your position on what you think is right. And yet, we are going to hear silence again. That is fundamentally wrong. We talked about today our opening prayer. And in that, the opening prayer talked about giving each member, not only myself, each member across this beautiful province, wisdom. Wisdom to make the right choices, to do the right thing for your communities and for Nova Scotia. And I know back home that a member of my community is praying not only for the safe driving and the health in my travel to here, but they're also praying for wisdom for myself. And not only for myself, but for the entire members of this House, to have wisdom and have the direction and the common sense to make the right choice. Here is an opportunity to do the right thing, to correct the old political standards that we've seen for decades. It's going to be interesting, Mr. Chair, in the next few months as we watch the leadership of the third party. There's going to be an opportunity for these questions to be confronted. There's going to be an opportunity, I predict, in debates through their leadership campaign, public forums, the media. Mr. Joe Public will have an opportunity. Did you have an opportunity to speak on the amendment dealing with trust funds? And I want to be encouraged And I'm sure that our caucus is going to use that line somewhere in the next year, 6 months, 18 months, that they did speak on this. And they did see the opportunity to clear this up. It's going to be interesting to see if the other two parties speak tonight on this, or they still remain in silence. Martin Luther King had a dream. He had a dream, and if I remember right, he was encouraged to go to that speech on that particular day, and if my facts serve me right, he wrote his speech on a simple paper table napkin, because he had a dream. What we're facing here tonight is a nightmare. It's a nightmare dealing with trust funds that have been originated for a number of years. It's a time to move forward. And I just pulled the definition of the word nightmare from the library today. I'm just going to read you 2 or 3 of the meanings regarding nightmare. A nightmare is a dream arousing feelings of intense fear, horror, or distress. 2, an event or exercise that is extremely depressing. The third, a demon or spirit once thought to plague sleeping people. This has been laying dormant for a number of years, and I believe here is the opportunity, here is the time to deal with the nightmare of politics in Nova Scotia. And I think you're going to see a number of our colleagues speak on this particular one, and it's time to put the boogeyman or the nightmare to rest. And I've had the opportunity or pleasure to listen in on different discussions in the last few days. What would you do with the trust agreements? What would you do with the trust funds? Some ideas. Yesterday we had a protest here. What better way of sending it to the farmers of Nova Scotia, the people that need it? That would be a quick fix, I would think. A huge message. And I know a number of food banks across Nova Scotia would love to have that in their funds. And better still, the children of this beautiful province, the IWK, could use this money. And I think the list can go on and on and on. And I'm sure my colleagues would find other ways of using this money. Mr. Chair, there's one thing I can stand here and say, that there's never been any large amount of money that has given me the opportunity to stand here today and to represent Shelburne County. I can guarantee that. And I can guarantee it to other Nova Scotians who believe in the grassroots democracy. And I was warned. I was warned by a number of my constituency as I took on this challenge. And they told me, Sterling, whatever you do, do not change. Keep working for the local people, at the local level, at the grassroots. And I can assure you that you will not link any big organization or big money to me. The challenge is to address the issues, to challenge the government, and to address local issues. Debate our concerns because you are grassroots politicians. And I believe this is where we're moving. We're moving from the old tradition of the backroom boys, the backroom deals of nylons and rum and what you can buy with some money for election. I think we're moving away from that. And the message that I received on the campaign trail in the last few months is that you continue working for your community. People want to understand that you're sincere and you're addressing the issues of your community, and I believe that's the wave of the future. Mr. Chair, recently, in the last few months, I've had the opportunity to speak on a local radio station in the Tri-Counties. Simply after 4 months of being in office, I was beckoned to the radio station to address the concerns in my particular county. And I was intrigued and I was interested in some of the comments. And they were talking about home repair grants from community service, or the lack of, and the delay or the waiting times that people had to endure. They talked about the partial completion of the 103 highway and how long they've been waiting for that. And not only Bayside Home have they been waiting for 30 years, but they have also been waiting for the completion of the 103 highway. And I can sincerely stand here today and say that was part of our platform, and that has been completed. We also talked about the Digby Ferry at that particular time, which was very vital to the coastal communities in the Tri-Counties. And not once with all them different questions, and there was a number of others, not once was I intimidated, or I had to stop and think, was I connected to big money? Was I intimidated by somebody making a financial contribution to my election? No. Not one split second, because I was there with the best interests of my community.
Here, here, here.
Very simple.
That's why you're here.
And I'd just like, Mr. Chair, to make a reference to the famous Visa commercial, if I'm correct. The long contributions or the large contributions of $200,000.
Yeah.
$200,000 for large corporations or unions.
Yeah.
Let's don't skirt around it.
No.
$200,000. $20,000 for a consultant firm to do polling research for election parties. $2. $2 for a simple plastic sign with my name on it, with a small spruce stake driven in somebody's private property with my name on it, talking about the local issues in our county, is priceless.
Absolutely.
That is priceless, and all the money that's in these trust funds will not buy that. That is the wave of the future in Nova Scotia. That is where politics is going, and there's no money in this world it's going to stop that trend. Well, they're there. The federal government has caught on to that, and I believe it's an opportunity here tonight. Here is the opportunity to break the shackles. Break the shackles for these trust funds. And Martin Luther King talked about a dream, and I'm talking about a nightmare. Here is the opportunity to rid yourself, and the people are going to listen. And we may not believe that the cameras are not rolling, but they are listening and they're watching. And they're going to particularly watch on this amendment, because here is the opportunity to rid yourself of these shekels. And it's going to be interesting, Mr. Chair, in the next several months, as we look at the leadership race for the third party.
Oh, yeah, I wonder.
It's going to be interesting to watch that play out, and it's going to be interesting to see the public discussions, the public debates.
Who's going to participate in the debate here?
And I'm sure somewhere along the line, someone is going to ask that question. Did you have the opportunity to distance yourself from these trust funds? And the answer is going to be simple. Well, I think it's simple here tonight. Here is an opportunity to talk about it, to discuss and debate with your colleagues and make the correction. And I think the public will pick up on that particular note. You know, Mr. Chair, people suggest that municipal government is the government that is closest to the people. And I can tell you that I spent 9 years at the municipal level. I know basically every resident in that municipality. I know basically all of them. And you can get confronted, for lack of better words, or you can get different requests, whether you're at the local hockey game, or the curling club, or the ball field, the fishing wharf, or the fisherman's haven. Why? Because you are of the people. And there's no money that takes you to put your simple name on that ballot if you're interested at municipal level. And there's very little campaign literature or advertisement gone into municipal politics because it's pure. It's at the grassroots level, and that's exactly what took place in Shelburne at the last provincial election. It was simple, a simple quest to represent your community of the different ideas and the problems that is being faced and being overlooked for decades. I'm talking of being overlooked for decades, whether it's on health care, the fisheries, the roads, economic development. The people are tired of old-time politics, and they wanted a change. And that simple message of grassroots politics, as if when you put your name on a ballot and you take that ideas to a person, and when the election is called and you're down and you have your traps out and you have men back on the stern that's making a living, and your opposition has a 5 or 8 day head start on you, you have to realize that you're dependent not on money, not on the way that politics have done. You're depending on grassroots politics. And the scenario was set. Our fishing season was in the last election when it was called, and we had to bring the traps in and fish them as normal. So we was at a disadvantage, but we were not. We were not, because all we had to do was pick up the phone and make a couple phone calls to people within the community, and it wasn't about money. It wasn't about how much we had in the bank account and what we could do for advertisement. It was about an idea. It was about an idea of representing your county and dealing with the challenges that fishing wants to stay in our community for generations to come. It's about having our roads being completed in a reasonable time frame. It's about addressing long-term care in our community that's been overlooked for 30 years.
30 years, I got it.
A simple message. And when you can motivate people by one phone call and say simple as this, either you're going to be in and there's no money involved, and this is what we're going to do because we believe in our community. And it was almost like it was a magical trip because people bought into that concept. They bought into representing their people, and they knew that there was no big money that was going to get you there. It was just the grassroots movement. And I can assure you that we're on that way, and we are going to change. And politics is going to change very swiftly, because that's the message that was coming loud and clear from Shelburne County. There was momentum there, and it's not going to change. Nope. The momentum is still there, and it's still growing. So now, and if you go right back to the words of advice, to the prayer that we start each day off with, to pray for wisdom, for strength, for each MLA. And here is the opportunity that we can correct this wrongdoings and misgivings of a trust fund that both parties are going to be linked to.
Take your time, man. Take your time. You're doing fine. That's why they put you here. You weren't going to do it not the old way. You're going to do it your way. Do it your way. The honest way, the direct way.
It's interesting, Mr. Chair. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of watching a protest outside this particular chambers. And I know everybody was fascinated about the speeches, and they looked at the overall gathering, the way the police force controlled the crowd. And I must say that it was all managed relatively well. But I bet I was the only person there was looking at the signs. I looked at the signs with particular interest because on my campaign trail, the individual that made them little spruce stakes that drives in the private property and puts a $2 sign was made by an individual that could not afford to take out a membership.
Wow.
He wanted to take out the membership of $10, and I said no. I refused him. I said, you take your money and you spend it on your family. And yesterday, there was people there that had these little spruce signs and held the placards up. And it's interesting to know who was the person that made them. Was it big money? I would believe it's somebody that comes from a small community like myself that believes in pure politics, that believes in what they're doing on that particular day will have an impact.
Grassroots.
It's same as the individual back home that built the 200 or 300 for myself, that put them on public property or private property. They were making a statement. We are tired of being overlooked on all the different concerns in our community, and here's the time to making a statement. A person, and one of my colleagues talked about the biblical reference of pittance that couldn't afford it. And here's an individual that couldn't afford $10, but they made a difference. They made each and every one of them spruce stakes that drove in the ground. And I noticed that yesterday. And I also noticed a small child out there with a sign that was made of cardboard. And I thought that was intriguing because to me that was the best one.
Yes, sir. Homemade.
It was homemade.
Grassroots.
It was grassroots, but that individual, probably I'm guessing somewhere between 10 and 12, handmade that out of cardboard. It was crayons or a magic marker. The total cost of that probably was 25 cents, 50 cents at max. What a message to send from that youth of making a statement to this particular government on a 25-cent sign. There's no big money there. It's a simple idea that their message is being lost, that this industry, like the fishing industry, needs to be protected. We need people in this House to stand up and represent the communities across Nova Scotia and not based on the money that's in a bank account somewhere. That's the message. And there's no agreement that will change that. The other point, Mr. Chair, is I think of great concern as we look across Nova Scotia in the last decade is the low voter turnout.
Oh, it's cynicism.
People want to feel part of the process. And I think that that youth yesterday felt part of that process. And he made a contribution to their community, and the message has been delivered to the House. No big money. There's no big money there. And this is what the public, I believe, is being turned off from politics. They see the old-style politics where money can give you the impression of being attached to it. And things need to change. It's interesting also to note, Mr. Chair, that the public has not been consulted on this particular bill. And yesterday, as I watched with interest as the third party talked about why they couldn't accept an amendment. And I was somewhat surprised, and I made quick note of that because they had not seen the amendment. It had not been a part of their consultation. It had not been discussed at committee. They did not see it at caucus, and therefore it was rejected. It was rejected on that principle because it didn't follow due process. But yet, the opportunity for this bill to go out for 6 months to talk to the people across Nova Scotia has been refused. I find that very fascinating. How can we bring an amendment in, and yet they can use that same principle of what we're trying to say to this whole House? Here is an opportunity to take this bill and give the public an opportunity to be consulted. And I'm just amazed at that, how fast this can happen. And it's interesting that we have bills in here dealing with Fisheries Loan Board, of issues that we have been talking about for decades again. And I can remember going back a number of years. And finally, and that's another campaign promise that we campaign on. We want to deal with the Fisheries Loan Board in our community so we can pass on them to the next generation. It's a part of the platform. People bought into that. People want to be consulted. But here we have an opportunity to deal with this, and we're turning our back on this particular opportunity to consult with the people of Nova Scotia. And to me, Mr. Chair, this is simply an opportunity to clean up politics, not to be influenced by corporations or unions from large donations. And the people of Nova Scotia will be watching and they will be listening. And I'm sure you, again, that this question will be asked. It will be asked. You know, we had an opportunity to take this bill throughout Nova Scotia and ask different people who fill the halls of our community and give them an opportunity to speak from the heart of the residents who represent the grassroots democracy of our province. And again, we will miss this opportunity. What we could do, to me, is we can make a political difference. And we can make a difference here tonight. And I'm sure that my colleagues will attempt to do that. And we'll speak into great length about this particular issue. And it's interesting, I spoke earlier to the Minister of Health about my particular grandfather that moved from the Pumlicos in 1905. 1905, two brothers moved from East Pumlico to Shelburne County, married. They raised a family, they worked the land, they worked the ocean, and my grandfather was involved in politics at the municipal level. It's very interesting. It's very interesting to see that. And I took the opportunity, Mr. Chair, to go back in the municipal records in the late 1930s, and I read with great interest. I read with great interest the amount of money that was allotted to them individual councillors at the time. And the name of that money was called dole. And the dole was distributed out amongst the needy, the people in our community that was looking for health care, the sick. And it was interesting that they had the discretionary fund or the wisdom to look after them. And it's interesting that politics hasn't changed from way back then. We need to move forward because the people, the local grassroots people, looked after them people in their community. And, you know, I think we moved away from the nylons and the rum. We need to move away from the trust funds. It's simple. The towns of Lockport, the town of Shelburne, the town of Clark's Harbour, the municipality of Barrington, they all hear views of the people and all are listening to what we have to say on this particular topic. And I want to assure you, Mr. Chair, Martin Luther King had a dream. And we're not dealing with a dream world here tonight. We're dealing with a nightmare that every Nova Scotian knows. They know that exists. It is time to put this boogeyman to rest. It is time to clean up politics. It is time to set the record straight. And I'm looking for my colleagues to respond on this particular topic. And let's get it right for once. Let's do the right thing here. We have some opportunity to make some positive change in Nova Scotia. Mr. Chair, I'm suggesting to you that we should have total support of this amendment, and I thank you for the time. I really appreciate the opportunity to stand here. I thank you for the time, and I look forward to my colleagues speaking on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I recognize the next speaker, I just want to report to all members in the committee the time that was conducted yesterday in committee is what's been reported on the order paper, 13 hours and 39 minutes after having consulted with the clerks. I noticed that we had a late show last night that had not been included. So I want to report to all, we have 6 hours and 21 minutes remaining in committee today. Thank you. The next speaker, the honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to once again talk about Bill 117, an act to amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 1991, the Members and Public Employees Disclosure Act, and in particular speak about Clause 7 and the proposed Section 21B on page 5, which would, in summary form, actually return or disband the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia Trust Fund, which I believe is currently called the Investment Fund. Now, it's interesting because this bill has rekindled my interest in what's been happening on the federal scene. And so I've been doing a little bit of study about the Federal Accountability Act and Action Plan, which actually only received royal assent last month in Ottawa and is fairly new. And I was interested to read a little bit about it and find out that any trust fund used for political purposes is suspect. And it's interesting because now under the Federal Accountability Act, it actually prohibits federal members of Parliament from using trust funds for political purposes. And in addition, and I found this really illuminating, that one of the rationales that they give in this legislation, this act, which is meant to enhance federal finance reform, one of the reasons they banned corporate, union, and organizational contributions of funds was because they were, quote, from unknown original sources. Unknown original sources. And this was an argument used by our federal cousins as part of the rationale for the Federal Accountability Act. Well, if any original source could be considered suspect, it certainly would be the source of the Liberal trust funds. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a historian. And so I'm not going to debate the details of the Liberal Trust Fund in Nova Scotia, but I have read enough information gathered from sort of journalistic exposés, from insider revelations, from the RCMP investigation, from judicial outcomes, and also from admissions by people who were active within the Liberal Party at the time, to justify my party's concern about the origins of this so-called investment fund and its continued use for political purposes. Because this money was raised at least partially, if not entirely, at the expense of citizens and businesses at that time. Now, the reason I say that is because obviously the toll gating had to result in increased prices of those products on the Liquor Commission shelves, and the money that was going to the Liberal Party at that time, in terms of the toll gating, was money that was not being invested as, you know, as taxes and in the public purse of the province at that time. So I think that reason alone would justify our suggestion that this money be handed over to the Crown to be used for the public good of Nova Scotians today. It's interesting that at the minimum, Mr. Chair, everyone recognizes that the money, however it was raised, and looking at the continuation of its use to advance the political aspirations of just one political party in this province, it has to be controversial at the very least. So while I say I'm not going to debate the details of this, I think everyone can recognize that at the very minimal level of understanding and analysis, this fund is controversial. So it puzzles me how the government of today would actually condone the continued use of these monies, because in effect it undermines the very intent of the legislation that they've brought before us. And it's interesting, this investment fund continues probably 20 years or more after the money was collected. And it's an open sore on the credibility of politics within our province. Now, as I mentioned during the debate on title during Committee of the Whole House, I have a number of friends who are, quote, good Liberals. And I'm sure my colleagues within the third party could be considered good Liberals.
Still Liberals.
They're
Liberals.
they're hardworking, they're honest, they're dedicated to their communities and the people that they serve. I have the utmost respect for them. But it's interesting, whenever the subject or topic of the investment fund or the Liberal trust funds come up, they feel uncomfortable. They feel very uncomfortable. And it's obviously you know, a sore point with them. People don't know exactly what happened in all political parties. Sometimes those decisions are made by a select or few number of people. And the reason for collecting that money might not have been, you know, shared by all the members of the party, but it's continued to be a real problem for modern day Liberals. And I think there's an opportunity here, if I may be so bold to suggest, for another political party, there's an opportunity here as they enter into their leadership race to have a fresh, clean start. And what it would do, in both in terms of getting a new leader, but also in terms of handing over the trust fund to serve, you know, perhaps the common interests of all Nova Scotians, what it would do would be to get rid of, for once and for all, this this open sore that is not just undermining the credibility of the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia, but actually reflects negatively on all politicians in this province. So it's a disservice to all political parties, and not just their own, to continue the use of this trust fund or this investment fund for political purposes. And as I said earlier, obviously national and international standards around accountability and integrity suggest that the use of trust funds for political purposes is a no-no. So for once and for all, we need to cauterize this wound, and we need to end the embarrassment of the Liberal Investment Fund. Now, we can't go back and revamp history, but I think we all recognize that we've had a very spotty history in Nova Scotia in terms of personal and political integrity. And I'm not going to go back and rehash a number of the stories. I think we all know what they are. But the end result has been a disillusionment among the electorate that's impacting on our current situation in many, many ways. I mentioned in the earlier debate about the voter apathy and the lack of trust in politicians and our decision making. And it's interesting that each year, in the last 4 elections at least, voter turnout has gone down each year. And according to the Elections Nova Scotia website, it's gone down from 75.76% in 1998 to just 59.89% last year. The electorate doesn't think their vote counts. And I would suggest, Mr. Chair, that continuing the use of the Liberal Trust Fund is just part of the reason that voters in our province feel negatively about politicians and the political process. Because government and other political parties are viewed as being unwilling or unable to address issues that are important to them. And it's interesting, we've been brought back for this special session, this rare special session of the legislature in early winter. And I agree that most Nova Scotians probably have no idea what we're talking about here in reference to Bill 117. And because of the fast-tracked process to approve this legislation, they're not going to have a chance to either be informed about the significance of the legislation, nor are they going to have a chance to actually provide some input. And you know, I've researched, and I've mentioned earlier in this chamber, that other provinces have taken a more participatory approach to electoral reform. I mentioned Prince Edward Island, for example. They have created a special commission. They have a number of different steps to involve the public. They have an all-party committee looking at some of the recommendations that came out of that consultation. Those recommendations are going to go back to the public, and there's actually going to be a vote on the electoral reform package, separate from a provincial election. Other provinces have done very similar things. They've all used a different model, but they've all taken their time. They've made sure that enough information was shared with community members who were interested, that they could have meaningful input into the process. And what they'll probably end up with is a much better coordinated, more comprehensive package of electoral reform. Instead, we're going to have this rush job, a piecemeal approach that actually includes clauses that will undermine the very integrity of the legislation that we're talking about. And one of those clauses happens to be allowing, endorsing, I could use other, perhaps more inflammatory language, and I'll try to resist that, but at least endorsing the continued use for political purposes of the Liberal Trust Fund. I don't think this is something that we want to, I know this is something that we don't want to support. It's interesting that the Canadian Press and Leger Marketing Survey, which is done on an annual basis, continues to show politicians as the least trusted professional in Canada among the category of professions that have been survived, that have been surveyed. And the trust in politicians continues to go down each year, and we're at the bottom of the pack. Now, there may be a few people, oh, I'm sure they come number 2. There may be a few people here who didn't hear who were above politicians in this particular survey. That would include, just a minute now, and I'll find my notes on that.
It's all right, I remember what you said last week.
Yes.
Lawyers and journalists.
Lawyers and journalists, car salespeople. Yes.
Insurance adjusters?
That's right, insurance adjusters. Thank you. You were listening. Thank you very much. Yes. So it's embarrassing. It's shocking to think that politicians are lower than, and I won't pick out one category, but we've all made the jokes. We've all made the jokes about different professions. And to think that we're at the bottom of that list is hard to conceive. Another reason why we've got to somehow restore confidence and faith of the very people that we serve, both in the role of a politician, but also in the political process. And I'm suggesting that the approach we've taken with Bill 117, especially around Clause 7, which again I say will allow the continued use of the Liberal Trust Fund for political purposes, it's going to continue the disillusionment with politicians and political activity. Now, it's interesting that, as I mentioned earlier, the reference to the rationale for not using trust funds and other categories of political contributions where there's an unknown original source certainly applies in this case. And I wonder why we haven't adopted the best practices from the other provinces and certainly from the federal legislation. Some of the content, especially this particular clause, doesn't meet any standard, whether national or international, regarding fairness, regarding accountability, and regarding clarity. So again, this particular clause undermines, destroys the intent of the rest of the so-called electoral reform Bill 117. Now, it's interesting. I had occasion to look up in the dictionary the word farce. Now, it has two meanings as a noun. The first one surprised me. I'd never even heard of it before. Did you know that a farce is a mixture of ground raw chicken and mushrooms with pistachios, truffles, onions, and parsley, lots of butter, and bound with eggs? Now, I had never heard that definition of farce. But the one I was more interested in was farce as a comedy characterized by broad satire and improbable situations. So I wanted to give you that background because I'm going to call this clause farcical. And I can just imagine Rick Mercer, for example, doing a satirical piece on a clause that actually counteracts the so-called the public intent of a piece of legislation. And, you know, this bill, in a sense, is a satire because it could be considered a literary work in which irony in the sense of electoral reform, integrity, clarity, accountability. I'm just thinking of some of the issues that were discussed here in this chamber today. Irony, derision, or wit in any form is used to expose folly or wickedness. Now, I think I'll leave it there, but that's why I'm calling this particular clause farcical. Now, it's interesting that that this clause in particular doesn't meet any, as I said earlier, national or international standard around accountability, clarity, or integrity. And I just want to reiterate that I think there's a real opportunity here for our Liberal colleagues to have a fresh start, to get rid of this trust fund once and for all, to level the playing field, and I think prove to all of us in this legislature and all people across Nova Scotia that their motivation for supporting this piece of legislation, including Clause 7, is genuine, and that this bill is not a self-serving support to a couple of political parties. So here's a chance for both the government, and I did actually research comments made by individual government members over the past number of years about the Liberal Trust Fund, but I'm not going to quote them here. But just let me summarize by suggesting, Mr. Chair, that there has been considerable concern and criticism offered in this chamber and outside this chamber by members of the governing party. And it just, it intrigues me as to why they would actually combine with the Liberal Party in order to put this particular tainted money, continue the circulation of this tainted money for political purposes in our province. I don't think they're looking at the impact of this, both on the political process. I don't think they realize that it's actually going to undermine the legislation that we're considering here today. So I wanted to sum up by talking a little bit about listing again our arguments why the amendment why we have this amendment to Clause 7, why we are suggesting that that the held assets, which in this case are the Liberal Investment Fund, should become the property of Her Majesty in right of the province. If this were a genuine electoral reform bill, it would have to set higher standards regarding fairness, clarity, and accountability. It would not be an excuse to endorse poor judgments made in the past. The second point I want to make in closing is that there's a perception among the general public of Nova Scotia, those who are following this process, and once the legislation is passed, then I'm sure the media will be quick to inform them, if they haven't already picked up on this, that the two traditional parties are working together, not, I would suggest, in the best interests of the citizens of Nova Scotia regarding this matter, but in their own particular party best interests. There's an opportunity here by accepting our amendment to change that perception once and for all. And with the public financing of political parties, it's not as though there's not going to be something to replace it. It's going to provide a level playing field. It's going to provide equality of opportunity for parties and for individuals within those parties who are interested in running for election. And as I mentioned earlier, the timing is very good for the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia to set a new tone, to set a new standard, and to combine with us their support for this amendment, to combine their support with their exciting leadership race. And this, I would think, would go a long way to restore their credibility. Now, why should I give away my advice for free? I'm not sure. But I think this is an opportunity to do the best thing for Nova Scotians and not just what might be best for politicians. And this amendment would go a long ways to restoring public confidence in the stated intent of the bill. Now, I mentioned earlier in the debate that I was very concerned about the process that we were using to amend and vote on title and particular clauses. This fast-tracked approval of Bill 117, including Clause 7, which again I say was going to allow the continued use of these suspect trust funds, the process being used is counter to what's happening in any other province and also federally on the whole movement, electoral reform movement. Why are we so out of sync with what's happening across Canada? It almost makes one suspect that the motives for this legislation are not what drove changes to legislation and the various studies and commissions and consultations that were happening elsewhere. And if that were the case, I have no way of knowing that for sure or proving it, but if that were the case, I think it would just further lower the confidence of Nova Scotians that we are acting in their best interests. So we have a collective responsibility here. I'm sure all of you in your constituency offices get calls, even if you're not on the government side of the House, from people who say, you're in government, you should do this, you should do that, or whatever. To many people, once you're elected, you're government. They don't understand the party system. They don't understand that, one party is in government, even in a minority situation, and that they get to choose, the agenda, they get to form a cabinet, they get to make the major decisions around public policy. For many people, as soon as you're elected, they consider that you're government. And so in many people's eyes, they don't understand the undercurrents, the negotiations, the differences in political philosophy among the three parties, and they brand all of us as government MLAs. And so whatever happens with this legislation, for many people, they're not going to understand that, for example, that the NDP, as the official opposition in this House, had a number of serious concerns, including Clause 7, and that we kept proposing amendments, that we kept introducing additional clauses, trying to make this total package a little more acceptable, both according to national and international standards, as genuine electoral reform. And so we're all going to be branded with the same response from the public. You're just giving money to political parties. It's just trying to get more out of it for yourselves. You don't care about the 5,002 issues that we should be discussing this week, instead of standing here talking about a patchy, inconsistent, rushed piece of legislation that is actually going to turn people off. I'm really shocked to think that there continues to be, some talk about having a select committee looking at, democratic reform in the province. Not that we don't need it, but to have that reform package and recommendations coming back after we've passed this piece of legislation just doesn't make sense. And I think it's going to turn off the general public, and they're going to have even less interest in having meaningful input into perhaps a more comprehensive look at democratic reform for our province. So something's driving this behind the scenes. It's not coming from our party. We want to go even much further than this legislation calls for. And we feel that we can actually turn the corner and make it a much more progressive piece of legislation if we can include, this new proposal for Clause 7 that would actually take the held assets of political parties and make them the property of Her Majesty in the right of the province. And, we've heard many, many examples of where that money could be very well used to help people in need, to help sectors that are struggling under, conditions and problems outside their control. And I think it would add huge credibility to our efforts here in the legislature. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to finish there. I thank you for this opportunity. We have a chance to actually make a difference in the democratic process here, but we're not taking advantage of it if we continue to allow the endorsement of the Liberal trust funds to be included in this particular legislative package. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I take great pride to be able to stand here tonight in my place and speak on this particular clause. Back in November, I was part of our caucus who had an opportunity and I believe made the most of it to speak at great lengths on Bill 117 in particular and the entirety of that bill. But today I've been given another opportunity to come here in this House and speak on what I believe is a very, very important amendment being brought forward by the NDP. I want to say, Mr. Chair, that 10 years ago, as a young person, I probably would not have entertained the idea or thought of entering into the political field. And as my honourable colleague last night and tonight from Dartmouth, Portland, South had made mention of recent studies that stated the feelings of Canadians towards their elected officials. But I honestly believe that back in May, I put my name forth on the ballot, Mr. Chair, because I believed that politics in Nova Scotia was changing and that I could be a positive part of that change and actually truly represent the feelings and thoughts and voices of not only the people in Dartmouth North, Mr. Chair, but the people across this province. And I say, Mr. Chair, that politics is changing. We walk in the streets of Halifax or Dartmouth, or I travel down to St. Margaret's Bay, or I visit Queens County and Shelburne or Cape Breton, and we hear from people. We hear from people across this province. We see the government's campaign of come to life, come to Nova Scotia. But, Mr. Chair, the feelings of Nova Scotians today, the reason why we're here today putting forth this amendment is exactly why Nova Scotians don't feel like they're actually living a full, valued life, that they're actually part of the process. And it's due to trust funds, to this particular amendment that is dogged, that is plagued, that has been a moral stain on politics for all parties. Because we are all judged by citizens of Nova Scotians, we are all looked at. And when I got elected, when I was elected in June, Mr. Chair, You know, I went out, I ran my campaign as honestly, to my knowledge. I went out, I received a small bank loan to bankroll that campaign. I didn't have unions or corporations coming to my doorstep trying to influence me. But what I did have, Mr. Chair, is individuals who I spoken with and met on the doorsteps that had said to me at that time, Trevor, you're the best possible person to represent our children and our families, and we want to support you. And today I'm here, I've been elected, and I'm proud to voice the concerns of the residents and citizens of Dartmouth North. Now, unlike my honourable colleague from Dartmouth, Portland South Valley, Mr. Chair, I do want to quote some of the newspaper clippings, some of the comments made by former government members, because I think it's important, because what we've been given here, Mr. Chair, is an opportunity to educate the public to what has taken place, what may have been forgotten over the years, about that stain that's been on politics that has plagued the political process in Nova Scotia. Mr. Chair, when this bill was put forth in the House back in November, the Honourable Minister of Finance had stood in his place and said that this was an important piece of legislation. And I truly believe that this is long overdue, and it is a crucial part of legislation and the political process, not just today, but in years to come. But here we are in the same process as we were back in November. The NDP have spent this week and several weeks past coming up and drafting up amendments that we believe will fill the void in this bill. But yet we go forth this week and we hear no debate from the third party, the Liberal Party, potential candidates that might run for leadership of this province, that have aspirations to lead the people of this province. We haven't heard any debate. We haven't had any good ideas come from that party. Nor have we heard any comments, be it legitimate comments from the government side, Mr. Chair. And am I frustrated? No, I'm not frustrated. I think we're doing a disservice to the people of this province because we are here to debate. We have been called in on an emergency session in January, unprecedented, to debate the importance of passing this legislation. But it's not important if we merely just go through the process and rush this through without filling those voids and the holes in this legislation. And that's what we're here for, Mr. Chair, is to draft up the best possible legislation that is going to truly represent and benefit the people of this province. And if we don't pay attention, if we don't draft up and we don't debate and make this bill better, I think we are indeed doing a disservice. Liberal trust funds, Mr. Chair. In the past, you know, the former Minister of Justice, who's now our Minister of Finance that brought this bill forth, had stated that, you know, indeed to fully adhere to and follow through on true democratic reform, that, you know, the Liberals should give up this trust fund money. And I want to take you through a little bit of a timeline. And through some of the quotes that we've heard and comments off the cuff back in November and this week, we've had members say, you know, why are you debating something that's already been solved? Something that's already been taken care of? You know, what I'm going to say to you in the next couple moments, Mr. Chair, is gives us good reason to discuss this because it's not gone away. It's been tucked away for the benefit of the Liberal Party, but never fully disclosed. It's still there, and that's why we're here debating this and putting forth this very important amendment. I want to quote from an article from the Chronicle Herald back in November 27th, 2002, and former, well, actually he's not former, he's still the honourable member from Cape Breton South, had stated that when the Justice Critic brought forth a bill for the NDP, the honourable member from Eastern Passage, Cole Harbour, that it was merely to spite the Liberals because they were on the crux, they were about to become the government. They were the government in the waiting. Well, I say to you now, Mr. Chair, that we're discussing this bill and this amendment today because the trust funds haven't been dealt with, but there's no election before us. There's a Liberal leadership race, but there's no election. So is it fear-mongering? Is it a smudge campaign? No. the NDP have come forth this week with some very, very good ideas and proposed amendments that we think is important for this piece of legislation. Back on December 14th, 2002, the then Liberal Party president and now MP of Dartmouth Cole Harbour, Mike Savage, had also stated that, again, it was the government in waiting that were on or being attacked by the NDP. But at that time, there was and I'm going to quote again, Mr. Chair, a long-time Liberal, George Hawkins. George Hawkins, God love him, you know, he was honest and forthright and stood in his place at a time where it wasn't popular. But he stood there and he said, Mr. Chair, that some of it allegedly was raised through kickbacks and a levy on alcohol sold in government-operated liquor stores, and that money should not be kept. At that time, Mr. Chair, George Hawkins said that it was a millstone around the party's neck, and that he felt that he was unable to raise funds for leadership campaigns, for his own candidate campaign, because people were judging them. People were telling the Liberal Party and the Liberal Party members that they didn't need to ask for donations because they could just go to the trust funds. And I want to touch on, again, the member from Cape Breton South who in November, and I remember, you know, eyeing him across this house, and when he stated, what are we discussing this for? This took place 40 years ago. It hasn't fully been dealt with, Mr. Chair, and that's why we're here today. We're here today because the Liberals, back in 1998, borrowed $1.8 million from the trust fund to fight the 1998 election campaign. And in 2000 and again in 2001, the party supported change to the party's constituents to allow freer access to the funds, Mr. Chair. We're here today to discuss this amendment to finally do away with this because in 2003, the party reported that it could not use the trust fund to fight election campaigns since it had lost so much money in the markets. Well, poor, pitiful old me. I've lost money on the trust funds. But the trust funds, the monies from the trust funds belong to the people of this province. Those are the people and the individuals that really lost. We're here today to discuss this amendment because on April 8th, 2005, the Liberal Party, at their annual meeting, voted to allow the party to draw $500,000 from the trust funds to pay off the 2003 election bills and to draw up to $500,000 to fight the next election campaign. Well, Mr. Chair, it's 2006. The Liberal but the people of this province have spoken. We have a government that won a slim majority and an NDP party that continues to climb because they represent the true feelings and thoughts and concerns of the people of this province. And until we fully do away with the trust funds, until we truly, fully adopt this amendment, which the Honourable Minister of Finance in 2003 stood in his own place as Justice Minister and said they should give back this money. That the former Tory party president, John Abbas, said that it's all tainted money, and it was all gathered in that same manner. Donald Cameron, former premier, had stated as long as they're going to use this money to run their next campaign, then I'm not letting the issue drop. So we have a history, Mr. Chair. We have a history of former Liberals, former Conservatives, speaking out on an issue that is truly important to democracy, to the political process that is in Nova Scotia. And with the post-Gomery reports, you know, we ask people, why should you even be concerned or want to be a part of the political process? When I talk to a low-income family, they say, well, why should I vote? The government doesn't care about me. Or when I talk to a senior and a senior says, well, services have been depleted. I don't have no longer or get the care that I need, that I deserve. Seniors are the foundation of our country, but those are the first programs that get cut by government, Mr. Chair. Programs to seniors because they consistently vote the way they've always voted, and low-income people because low-income people don't vote. But if we adopt this clause, if we truly rid ourselves of the trust funds once and for all, if we come clean with the people of this province, the people of Nova Scotia, who I honestly believe have come to the forefront and have said to every elected official, it is time to step up and truly, truly support our ideas and our best interests, to allow us to thrive and live in this province the way we should be. But we're held back. We're consistently held back because someone long time ago told me that I deserve, that I should step into the place that has been gifted to me. I belong here. Well, Mr. Chair, like I said, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have took my place in this House because I didn't have the faith in the political process, because it had become self-serving over the years. It had become who you know or who donated to your campaign, who elevated you to that position as an MLA or as leader. And you know, in the last few days, I've heard the Premier respond to questions. Yesterday, the honourable member from Halifax-Fairview, Halifax-Siddle, had recited campaign donations to that leadership. That, you know, and today again we heard of Cornwallis, that the name Cornwallis, the company that actually donated to that campaign, to the Tory party. You know, in the eyes of the everyday Joe in Nova Scotia, it says to them that they cannot rise above the position that they have in our society. And my honourable colleague from Shelburne today had quoted Martin Luther King as saying, I have a dream, and we all remember the quote. And there's an American dream, and I believe there's a Canadian dream. And it's not just for Canadian citizens, it's for every citizen that chooses to come to our country and become a Canadian citizen, our immigrant population, Mr. Chair. But if I'm an immigrant being invited to this country and I want to enter into the political field, I know, because of issues and situations like trust funds, that it's an obstacle. It's a nightmare. How do I get past that? What supports are in place? What connections do I have to elevate me past this? Shackles of influences have been mentioned. There's no question. Shackles of influence. But I think there's a change coming, Mr. Chair. There is a change coming, and I strongly believe that when we wake up every day and we listen to the news on the radios, we watch the 6 o'clock news, we read the editorials and the comments to the editors in the papers, we know that Nova Scotians are fed up. And we're $13 billion in debt, and that's been created by two governing parties over the years. And people are tired. They are tired of just getting by because of situations like trust funds that have allowed people, individuals, to stay in their place of privilege, but not allow somebody to rise from the ashes and overcome circumstances and assume that place of leadership or assume that role of an elected official. Don't hold people back. We want leadership. We want young people to come back to our province. We're advertising in Alberta right now, Mr. Chair. We're spending Nova Scotian taxpayers' money in hopes of bringing young people back. We've asked for breaks on tuition. You know, 13, 14, 15 years ago, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, we've had the same situation. We have individuals, young people going to university, but we don't have any jobs to give them when they come out. But if I have a young person in front of me, and when I go to the local community schools in Dartmouth North, and I have an individual that says, Mr. Zink, can I have your autograph? And yes, Mr. Chair, children have asked for my autograph. Where does that put me? What place have I risen in? How high have I become? Have I ever forgotten? Because on the campaign trail, I've also had individuals say, Trevor, don't change. Trevor, don't become like one of them. Well, I can tell you, Mr. Chair, that there's no union money, there's no corporate money in the coffers of the NDP caucus, the NDP party, that is going to allow me to rise in my place. There is no sense of entitlement here on this side of the House. There are individuals in this caucus that truly believe that we, the NDP, have the best interests of the people of this province at hand. And it's not through funds that came from toll gating. And I see the honourable member from Cape Breton South is here, and I'm glad, and I believe he's served this province well.
Order, please. I just want to remind the honourable member, drawing the attention of any member in the House. It's not allowed, okay? The honourable member from Dartmouth North. Thank you.
I will remove that comment. I thank you for that. But I do indeed, Mr. Chair, think that it, you know, when I look at where I came from, that, you know, over the years, my ascent to the position that I hold now, I can tell you that there's no one that I owe. There's no chance of me looking over my shoulder saying, someone is going to judge me because I had a pocket full of money dropped in my lap to try to influence me to hold my position that I hold today. There's none. And I know that if I didn't speak at great lengths on this amendment, if the NDP don't hold their place this week in this debate, in this emergency debate on Bill 117, it'll get whitewashed, it'll get pushed through the House, and Nova Scotians, a year, 2 years, 10 years down the road, will say to themselves, what have we done? It's a piece of legislation full of holes. We haven't done it justice. But we have an opportunity, finally, to rid ourselves, all political parties, of the moral stain that has plagued this province for years, and that is the trust funds. And I want to say, Mr. Chair, that we have an opportunity, the NDP, the governing party, and the third party. And specifically, I want to, point the next comments in the direction of that third party, because as we all know, they too are on the crux of a leadership campaign. And that it's interesting that this Bill 117 doesn't address the fact that they can use the trust funds to draw on that leadership campaign. But we're gonna end up, as we all do, we have an opportunity to rise in this House to speak to that, to address the situation, and those 9 party members have an opportunity to do that, as they have all week. And those individuals that consider themselves to have an opportunity to lead the people of this province, I await their comments on this clause. I await a potential vote that we might want recorded. Because, Mr. Chair, I believe the people of this province, although we all think no one's paying attention and the media is distracted, I think, as my honourable colleague from Timberley Prospect stated yesterday, that we have been given ammunition, because the next election, when I go on the doorsteps, Bill 117 is going to be quoted. Every comment, every one that participated, Bill 117 will be commented on. Because the people of this province want to know where the money comes from, where the money's being spent. And every individual in the Liberal Party that believes honestly that they can lead the people of this province will have to answer to that and to this clause this week or in the coming weeks.
You got the ear of the House.
And they have an opportunity, and I can honestly say, the old saying, walk a mile in my shoes, well, I'll tell you right now, Mr. Chair, I wouldn't want to walk in their shoes in 2, 3, 4 months' time without addressing this now. Cut it off now. Answer the questions now. Over and done with. Whether you know where it's at, you don't know where it's at. Nova Scotians want to know your honest opinion on the situation. And I honestly hope that the people of this province will get that chance. They'll have that opportunity to hear those possible candidates from the Liberal Party. And believe it or not, there are individuals that sit home and watch Ledge TV. And they pay attention. and they're watching with great interest. And in past years, we've watched parties come to the forefront from the third position and jump over and go right immediately to the top. Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Chair, I honestly believe the people of this province, unless this clause is adopted and made part of this legislation, will not allow the Liberal Party to leapfrog into first place, because these questions have to be answered. And despite the fact that we believe it's been dealt with, that we've been told it's been dealt with, it's still an issue today. It's been an issue in '98, it was an issue in 2000, it was an issue in 2003, and that tells me, Mr. Chair, that it hasn't been dealt with. But we have an opportunity here, and I believe we have an obligation to the people of this province. An obligation to renew the faith in the voters. And the honourable colleague in Clayton Park, I've recited a stat, and 15 years ago, voter turnout was 75% in that area. And the past election, it barely crept above 50, and that tells me something. It tells me that the community is made up of a large immigration population that feels disenfranchised, that doesn't feel a part of the process. It tells me that planning has allowed a lot of apartment buildings where people don't feel a part of their community. And as you all know, as MLAs, if you come to Dartmouth North, there's several apartment complexes. And I'll tell you, Mr. Chair, it's difficult to get into those areas at come time for election. But I honestly believe as well, like I said, that over the years, Nova Scotians have gotten frustrated with the way politics and the way decisions are made in this province. Who makes the decision, who the decision benefits, and when we talk about positive legislation, which I honestly believe Bill 117 is, I believe it's an important piece of legislation for this province, long overdue, but not the way it's being rushed through now, not the way that attempt went back in November, and we rushed in December, and we invited the public out for a week during the busiest time of the year for most. That reeks of bad politics all over again, Mr. Chair. Have we listened? Have all three parties gotten together and said, what's really in the best interest of the people of this province? Or is this bill mainly about money? Is it all about money? And who will benefit from the use of that money? Because it's not the Conservative Party that has the trust fund, it's not the NDP party that has the trust fund, it is the Liberal Party indeed. And I honestly believe that it'll truly become a level playing field if we are able to adopt this amendment with this piece of legislation. I believe it's truly going to be a positive step in renewing the faith of the people of this province, in improving the democratic process in this province. It will allow me to go to young people in my constituency and say, you have a chance. You have an opportunity no matter what level of society you come from. You can rise above, you can elevate yourself, surround yourself by the positive people that will allow you to escalate to that role of leadership, to possibly a future MLA, Mr. Chair. Will we hear from the third party, the Liberal Party? Will we hear from future candidates? I absolutely hope so, and I hope it's not just off-the-cuff comments, because I'm interested in the democratic process, and that's why I take my place tonight. I'm interested in hearing how sincere, how important it is. And as I stated earlier, Mr. Chair, members of the governing party today have spoken out against in the past on this one issue, on the trust fund issue. Former Liberal members have spoken out. George Hawkins had said it was like a millstone around his neck. You know, I don't know where poor George is now, but like I said, we're in the same situation. And I believe it's not just a Liberal issue right now. I believe it affects all of us. I believe it affects all of us. And the interesting thing, you know, when this bill was first proposed, Mr. Chair, I was real interested to see the connection to Dartmouth North. I had no prior knowledge to that. The connection that this tainted money had in the area of Dartmouth North and a former MLA. Disappointed? Well, not really, because the people of Dartmouth North had made many, many good decisions over the last several years in the direction that they want their governing elected officials to take them. And I believe we're on the right path, but I believe also, Mr. Chair, that to continue on, to renew the faith in the people of Nova Scotia, to renew the faith in our young people, we have to go to them. Tomorrow I'll have one of my local high schools in here, and I want to be able to tell them that they too have a chance, once they graduate, to be where I am, to stand where I am today. But I know there are individuals that don't come from the same circumstances as some of us have, that haven't had the same opportunities. I strongly believe that if there is one amendment, Mr. Chair, that we can have influence, positive influence, on the political process and Bill 117. If we can come out of this and have support, and maybe it's not all three parties, maybe if individuals sit back and vote by conscience, and I know it's difficult to do, but if we truly admit to ourselves that this is an unfair process, as the Conservative Party have in the past, and as the NDP party has in the past, I think we can come together with a solution and implement and make this clause a part of this piece of legislation and improve the democratic process, improve the perception that we are all judged on by the public now, as we have in recent days. So therefore, Mr. Chair, I thank you for your time and listening, and I'm going to pass it on to my next colleague. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to have an opportunity to speak to the amendment. It's interesting, you know, I was sitting here thinking about, it's a little ironic, you know, Mr. Chair, and I think you would agree with me, that probably our election rules are, at this stage in our history, more open and more transparent than at any other time in our parliamentary system. But at the same time, the level of confidence that the public have in their political system is probably at an all-time low. I mean, there's something sort of contradictory about that, isn't there, Mr. Chair? I mean, it seems to me that, you know, it wasn't so long ago in the province of Nova Scotia and probably throughout the country that nobody really had to report too much about what it was, where their money was coming from. There were no limits on campaign donations or political donations. There was no tax credit. I think, in fact, Mr. Speaker, the history of a tax credit, a political tax credit, was a change in the federal legislation that was brokered in a minority government where the NDP held the balance of power and Ed Broadbent was the leader of the party federally. And that's, you know, that's a while ago, but it's in some ways probably back in the 80s, but at the same time not that long ago. And so this move to campaign reform and more openness, more transparency, and more fairness has been going on almost over the same period of time that the growing disillusionment of the public and a withdrawing from the political process has occurred at the same time. It's a little ironic. There's something contradictory there. Now, Mr. Chair, the amendment that has been brought forward by the official opposition is to amend Clause 21B of the Act of Bill 117. which basically says that any held assets that are being held in trust for a recognized party before July the 11th, 1991, can only be used in certain ways. And there's no doubt in anybody's mind here in this legislature, anybody who's read this bill, that this particular section of Bill 117 has been explicitly written to deal with the trust funds of the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia. It's as plain as the nose on your face, Mr. Chair, that that is the case, particularly because of this, this Section B of this clause. Now, I think this, of all of the implications in the bill in front of us, I have to say, with all due respect to all of my colleagues here in the legislature, this is the piece of Bill 117 that I find the most offensive. And I find it offensive that we have a clause like this in this bill that totes itself as a piece of campaign financing reform, a way to reform the financing of political parties and to contribute to democratic reform and participation and restoring public trust. It is, I think, very cynical, self-serving, and, Mr. Speaker, can only contribute to the ongoing concerns that Nova Scotians have about political parties and the basic flaws in the political party system. And Mr. Speaker, as you know, or Mr. Chair, as you know, as we all know here in this legislature, the political party is the cornerstone of our parliamentary system. We are not a parliamentary system of unallied independent members. We come to these places by running, generally speaking. It's rare that an independent member, not something that never happens, but it doesn't happen very often. We come to our places having run as part of a political party, as part of a team, and in fact, many of us could not have run effective campaigns without a political party structure. The money that's required, and many of us, we raise money on our own through our friends and our families and our networks, and we may personally go into debt, take out loans. But, Mr. Speaker, we all know that it's sort of the brand of the party that we represent that attracts campaign financing to our party because of the policies we expose, the values and the belief systems that we engender, the experience and the track record, perhaps, that we have had in different aspects of our communities and political life. And so the political party system is our democratic system, and we should be aiming to strengthen that system. We should be aiming to give that system credibility and legitimacy through the most open and transparent mechanisms for public financing that we possibly can, and we need to have legislation that ensures that any of the carryovers from those days when there was little accountability, there was certainly more corruption, and I would hope corruption that doesn't exist in our current political party endeavors is erased, is cast out. And this particular amendment seeks to do that. As you know, there remain in the trust funds of the Liberal Party of the province of Nova Scotia unaudited funds for which no records can be established from where certain monies came from. Mr. Chair, you and I were both at the Law Amendments Committee when we had an opportunity to talk about the process of this bill going through. And in preparation for that Law Amendments Committee, and I have to take this opportunity to thank the research staff in the NDP caucus, I was provided with a package of material that I went through. I spent at least 2.5, 3 hours reading the evening before. And like many Nova Scotians, I think, I had been under the impression that the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia had trust funds that indeed had been audited, and indeed that tainted funds from the toll gating affair of the 80s had been expunged from the Liberal Party trust funds. And I was quite surprised to find out that, in fact, that had not occurred. There had been an audit, there had been a review by Ernst & Young, but no audit. And in fact, Ernst & Young went to great pains in being very explicit and making it very clear that in no way had they done an audit of the Liberal Party trust funds, and that what they in fact had done was a review, that they had, and essentially they had done this, their review by examining the transcripts of one of the Supreme Court trials, the records, the transcripts of one of the Supreme Court trials where, as you know, there were several people had been charged with the tailgating issue, and in at least one case, a conviction was entered as a result of that trial. Now, Mr. Chair, this is not a matter that we should take lightly at all, that we have in the province of Nova Scotia a political party that has funds for which the source of those funds cannot be determined. The very principle of campaign financing that has become the standard for all political parties is that you have to very explicitly record what money you have, where it comes from, and increasingly I think we're moving in the direction of having in fact to say the methods in which we expend those funds, and there are limitations imposed in terms of how we expend those funds. And in fact, this bill and this particular clause does limit the expenditure of those held assets to periods outside the election period, the dropping off the writ and the election day. But as we all know, Mr. Speaker, that's a very, very short period of time. That can be as little as 30 days or 31, 32 days. And, you know, I just look at the last election that happened, Mr. Chair. You know, we were here in this legislature in the spring, in May, and there were members of this legislature whose pickup trucks had their signs all ready to go on the backs of their trucks. And certainly I would imagine that those signs would have been purchased and paid for and certainly would be used in the election. But, Mr. Speaker, they would not have to conform to this part of the legislation because the writ hadn't yet been dropped. And so, for all intents and purposes, what Bill 17 or 117 does is it institutionalizes a tainted trust fund, a fund that has never properly been audited, a fund that at this stage the records that would allow a proper audit probably could not occur, and it just seems to defy both the intention of the stated intention of the government in terms of electoral campaign reform to restore public confidence in the democratic system and our political system and our party system. And so for this is the reason, Mr. Chair, we would very much like to have this section amended. And what has been proposed in terms of an amendment here is that, in fact, the held assets by the Liberal Party of Canada be turned over and become the property of the province of Nova Scotia. Now, some people might think that that is a rather drastic measure to take. But, Mr. Speaker, I think it would be quite a liberating action for this legislature to take, not only for the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia, and God knows, Mr. Chair, they could use a little liberation, I think, some days. But, Mr. Chair, I think for all of us, it would make a huge difference to remove what some people have referred to as a stain on the political reputation of all of us in the province of Nova Scotia. And I know, Mr. Chair, you probably have your own views on this as a member of the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia. And I know within your party there are people who share the views that I've just articulated, as well as people who don't. It's not the virtue and high-minded ethics are not owned by any one individual or any one political party by a long shot, although I think sometimes the members of the Liberal Party must wonder if members of the NDP don't think that's the case. But, it certainly is. It is true that we recognize that this is a debate. And this has been a debate for a long time in the province of Nova Scotia. The Liberal Party of Nova Scotia's trust funds have been a debate for a long time, as the debate around union and corporate donations has been a debate for a long time. And I want to say, Mr. Chair, I'm very disappointed that we were unable to get the other amendments that would have eliminated union and corporate donations, if not immediately, but gradually. And I think if you think about the last few days in this House, they've been interesting, to say the least. It would have been quite nice to have a story coming out of this legislature that the three parties were able to cooperate and put aside the partisan politics long enough to have done something really significant that would change the political landscape for all of us, and we'd all suffer a little pain, and we'd all have a little gain, because, Mr. Chair, getting public money as a substitute for having to go out and bang on doors and ask with your cap in hand and asking people to support your cause does bring us a huge benefit. I want to say something about that for one moment, because some people have talked about public money as being something that could contribute to people not voting. And in fact, there are people who they don't like to see public money going for anything, including public health care, as you know. But I'm not one of those people who think that public money to political parties is a horrible thing. In fact, I think maybe if the public know that they're funding the political parties, perhaps they'll in fact demand a more active role in our parties, and they will take a greater interest. And so this is something that's a theory. I don't know that that is the case, but it will be worth watching. It will be worth looking to see whether or not the people will say, now just a second here, I fund your party. Like they say, oh, just a second, I'm a taxpayer. I fund that program. I pay your salary. And maybe a little accountability at that level wouldn't be a bad thing, Mr. Chair. But I digress, and you've been very patient indulging me in doing that, and I want to come back to the amendment. The amendment, as I was saying, would allow us to, and would allow the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia to divest of those trust funds over to the province of Nova Scotia, and my colleague from Timberley Prospect says do the right thing, and indeed he's right, this would be the right thing. And Mr. Chair, think about the things that the government could do with those funds. I've raised with the Minister of Justice, the Attorney General, the abolition of the criminal injuries compensation program here in the province of Nova Scotia. It was a small program, Mr. Speaker. It never paid out more than $400,000 a year, and in fact, I may have that even a bit higher than it was by maybe $100,000. It was a program for compensation for people in our province who were victims of violent crime, not property crime. Property crime was not a part of this program. But if somebody was assaulted, if somebody was swarmed, and we see these incidents more and more, and they give us great concern, I think, as a community and as a province. You know, I read a few weeks ago about the gentleman in Dartmouth who, like a good Samaritan, is driving along and sees somebody being beaten up, and he stopped to help. It was a woman, I believe, who was being beaten, and he stopped to help her, and the person who was beating her pulled a knife and stabbed this gentleman in the stomach several times. I think his name is Mr. Downey, Stevie D, he was referred to in the newspaper the other day, and I think actually I've met him once or twice in my travels, but I was reading that this gentleman is still recovering. He's been off work. He probably will be off work for at least 3 months and maybe longer. I mean, how does this gentleman support himself? How does he replace his that income? Generally speaking, there are many costs associated that we often don't think of as a result of an assault like that. An ambulance gets called. You're taken to an emergency department. You get a bill for $500. Who pays for that? If you don't have any kind of an insurance program that pays for that, you're out of pocket for those things. The Criminal Injuries Compensation Program in the province of Nova Scotia was introduced back in the 80s. It operated for many, many years. It was eliminated in 1999, I think was its last year of operation. They had about 400 applicants or claimants that year, and it came in under budget, and the expenditure was $300 and some odd thousand, Mr. Chair. I mean, this trust fund, the monies in this trust fund, could go to reinstate that program over a period of years, and victims of crime would have the kinds of financial supports to compensate their increased costs as the result of a crime. I know, Mr. Chair, that your colleague in the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia, the member for Clayton Park, has stood in her place on several occasions in the past session or so to talk about the Family Violence Prevention Initiative. Now, here is another very small, modest program of government. It cost in the vicinity of $270,000 a year, I think. It did a lot. It acted as a clearinghouse for information, public education around family violence prevention. And Mr. Chair, I don't know about you, but I've been alarmed looking at the numbers of incidents of women who have been murdered in our province in the last year or two at the hands of an intimate partner. It seemed that for a period of time these numbers had gone down, but suddenly we have this rash of incidents of women disappearing, women being murdered and their partners being charged and in some cases convicted. Now, Mr. Chair, I would argue, I would totally support the member for Clayton Park that, first of all, that program should never have been dismantled, but certainly we're seeing the impact of not having an active policy making, policy advising section of government there to do work until we're in a situation where no women are being assaulted and no women are losing their lives in domestic relations. Then we need those kinds of programs. We need a program like the Family Violence Prevention Initiative. And I would argue, Mr. Chair, that the Liberal Party trust funds, if they were turned over and became the property of the province of Nova Scotia, they could adequately fund the Family Violence Prevention Initiative for many, many years. So I'm sure we can all think of the places that those funds could be used to great advantage for the people of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health told us in the last session 160,000 people in the province of Nova Scotia have no pharmacare coverage. We had the situation of this young woman, Irene Larkin, who desperately needed drugs, who gets her drugs now through a compassionate program through the pharmaceutical industry, when the extended pharmacare program of this government is so inadequate that you basically have to have a social assistance income to qualify for extended pharmacare. And so, these funds could be used to support broadening the criteria so more people could qualify for extended pharmacare, particularly people who have life-threatening illnesses, whose drug costs are more than $1,000, $1,200 a month. And I think, Mr. Chair, you as the health critic of your party would certainly agree that anybody who had to pay $1,200 a month for medication, unless they're extraordinarily wealthy and have, an income that would support that, the average person, the average family, would find that a burden that is far beyond their means. And I know, as a person who represents the constituency of Glace Bay, you represent a hard-working, working-class constituency, many hard-working people who probably, you know, paycheck to paycheck. That's what my constituency is like. And I can't imagine having, in fact, to pay $1,200 monthly for drug costs. So there's another place that these funds could be used. So, Mr. Chair, there are so many needs in our province. There are so many places where these trust funds and the revenue in these trust funds could go that I think a number of things would happen if this amendment were to be supported. One thing would be that the reputation of the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia, which we all care deeply about here on the official opposition benches, would be restored. And the other thing is that people would benefit tangibly.